From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Coming up today, K-State's Glynn Tonsor with comments on the cattle market implications from the newly announced tariffs on imported goods from China, as well as from the USDA's latest Cattle on Feed report. Then, K-State's A.J. Tarpoff advises you cattle producers that now is the time to start putting together your strategy for late spring and summer fly control for the herd out on pasture. That includes cleaning up hay feeding areas which may otherwise serve as a breeding ground for stable flies. And later, Jeff Wickman with this week's 4-H segment. He'll talk with K-State's Sarah Keatley about the upcoming 2018 4-H Discovery Days here at K-State. All this and more right here on Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
This is Agriculture Today. Welcome once again. For our weekly cattle market segment, we have over once more livestock economist Glynn Tonsor of K-State Research and Extension. And the headliner, Glynn, the announced tariffs on China, and that resonates throughout so much in the economy, the livestock sectors included. That in a moment, but a quick recap of what went on last week. It was hardly a favorable week for the cattle trades.
Yeah, there was many things that took on a bearish tone during the week, and we're going to table the China thing for a moment, but let's just break down before you can get a cattle on feed report and a cold storage report. There's a lot of components to this. Right. Was the nearby live cattle contract was down a full $5 for the week. The April feeder cattle contract closed about $136 and was down $4 for the week. And cash trade was a mixed bag. Fed cattle cash was only down about $2.50. So if you want one silver lining on the week, is cash held on compared to the board when it looks at fed cattle last week. That's not always the case, but we did see that last week. Feeder cattle, as I said, was a very mixed bag. Depends on which market I would quote. AMS, I believe, was saying $2 or $3 losses up to like $10 losses, depending upon what market we look at. Here in Kansas, most weight classes were $2 to $10 off. A couple of the specific lots I wrote down were a lot of 127 head, 719 pounders traded at 143 and change. That would be down about $5. 750 to 950 pound range was down 5 to 10. It's worth noting those heavier weights were down even more. A heavy lot of 920 pounders went for about 125 here in Kansas. What I think is underneath that pullback on cash feeder cattle prices would be feedlots don't have a lot of extra bunk space, which will show up in a moment, our cattle on feed report, and there's tightening margins. You know, folks like me that put out projections, it's not a rosy story right there either. So that's pretty quickly reducing demand for feeder cattle, and we're starting to see that kind of beat up cash feeder cattle prices.
Didn't get much help on the cutout side either, you say?
No. Compared to last year, we're still better than we thought we would be, but in terms of just over the week, choice cutout ended the week at $223. That was down $2.50, a little more than 1% pullback compared to the prior Friday. Select was at $216 and change, not down nearly as much, 50-cent pullback. So, again, as you said, we didn't have any help. We had some erosion, if you like, in the cutout arena. But I will note, just as a little bit of a sidebar, given the bearish tone that was in the cattle trade, cutout didn't pull back nearly as much as you might think. So that sounds like it could be worse. This is the way I would put that, is maybe product's still moving. And, in fact, we're going to talk in a moment. Cattle on feed report tells me it is moving. So the choice select values did come down. They're weaker, but I will note they're still above last year, which is a positive thing to keep in mind, given we are still in this quote-unquote expansion phase. I will hone in just a moment on the choice select spread for a second, because this is the time of year we talk about that typically growing for multiple months. Currently at choice select spreads at $6.69. That's notably lower. It was $8.70 the prior week, and it's still about 10% higher than the prior year. So again, we've had this, let's call it erosion from last week, but keep some context. We're still in better shape than we were last year, to the extent that choice select is a demand for quality indicator. People pay up for choice. We tend to see that spread widen. that's worth watching beyond just that 1 week notable pullback. But because you look even deeper into the cutout market, the loin cutout value has been a drag for some time now. And that's not necessarily anything new to watch. But when we talk loin, we talk about higher quality demanded product. We watch the choice loin in particular, and it is a drag. So I hope to see that improve going forward. But I'm watching the choice select spread in a broad sense and even more narrowly the loin values to see if we've turned the table on a bad way on the demand front. That's what I'm watching for.
Year-to-year context is highly important here to keep this all in perspective. That cattle on feed report, well, the numbers at face value, they're not terribly encouraging in regard to higher placements than the average guess was. However, you say that it could have been worse, basically.
Yeah, I'm going to call it neutral on balance, mainly because everything's within range, and there's one a little bit surprised one way and one the other way that kind of offset. The March on-feed inventory is plus 9%, pre-report was plus 8%, well within range. The February placements were up 7%. This would be the one that some that want to put a bearish tone on it are going to point to. His pre-report number was up 4.5%. The range was up to almost 9%. So we're within range, but those placements were on the higher end of the range. Honing in on the placements for just a moment, I have to ask, and I don't really have data that gets at this, but just how many more cattle are out in the countryside? We continue to pull them forward. Lots of talk about dryness to the south. It's well noted. I'm happy to say I got rained on coming over here this morning, right. But we need more of that. But time will tell just how many more cattle are out there for us to pull forward in place. And we keep asking ourselves that when we have these quote-unquote surprise higher placement numbers. So there's a little bit of a bearish tone to that February placement is the point. The February marketings were up 2%. That was actually a little bit above the 1.5% pre-report on the higher end of the pre-report range. I note that because that is a positive. While it wasn't outside of expectations, it's on the higher end, and it is consistent with us continuing to move product. So one of the reasons those cutout values we talked about a moment ago are higher than a year ago is demand strength has been a pleasant surprise, and that's consistent with us continuing to move cattle. So that's worth watching, and it's consistent with the cold storage report, which we can visit about as well.
Let's get into that USDA cold storage report. What were the general indicators there?
So the good news there for beef is the beef volumes are down 8% compared to the prior month, and likewise down 8% from the prior year. Again, that's a very good, strong indicator we continue to move product. That's a thumbs up from the demand side, confirmation kind of perspective. The thumbs down concern part would be in the competing meat space. So frozen pork was up 6% on the month and 8% on the year. Chicken's up 3% on the month and a full 15% on the year. While I've noted before, I don't think competing meats have the same impact they used to. That doesn't mean we can ignore them. They still have an impact. And if you keep those pounds in the storage there, they're going to depress those prices. And at some point, we're going to see that spill over into the beef market. So my summary of the cold storage report would be in the near term, it's confirmation we're moving beef, which is a good, strong demand point. But we also have growing competing meat supplies, which begs the question, where are those pounds going to go, which leads us into the trade discussion.
There's a perfect transition there into this issue. And once more, China has announced plans to impose tariffs on a number of U.S. products in the wake of the administration here putting down tariffs against China. And prominent among those targeted products, pork.
Yeah, so they've announced plans to increase that tariff, as you said, and it would be up to 25%. So for those that are listening, that basically taxes U.S. product. Our product would become more expensive going into China, so U.S. pork would be at a disadvantage compared to before that announcement, compared to European Union and other major pork exporters. So the relevance of that is if our product gets more expensive, if nothing else changes, all else equal, we're going to send less pork into China than we did before. So therefore, what happens to that pork is the concern there. Either that it stays at home, so we have more consumed here, or we got to find a second best export market for it, either of which is probably going to be a lower value than before. So that's why there's some concerns with this announcement. And I don't want to ignore them. I don't want to give some context to this, it's easy to overreact when these kind of announcements occur. And there are a lot of big economic implications from this, so I don't want to mislead anybody. But we are not as reliant on China for pork exports as some think we are. So in 2017, 7% of U.S. exports went to China. That share of our export portfolio peaked at 14% in 2011, just to give context. And in 2017, there was 4 other countries, 2 of them are here in North America, Mexico, Canada, Japan, and South Korea, all of which we sent higher volumes to. Yes, China matters, and going forward might matter even more because it is a growth center of meat demand going forward, so I don't want to ignore that. But in the near term, the U.S. pork industry is not as reliant on China as it might look like at face value. That's important to keep in mind for context.
The tone of this, though, if you look at the potential at some point to move beef into China, tariff or no tariff, the atmosphere here is a little less encouraging.
Yeah, and that's where I would go. I would say the impacts of this are more indirect and less direct. So what I'm trying to get at is the direct impact in terms of the volume that was going there that isn't. I mean, it's real. We were sending 7% of our product there. I don't want to ignore those, but it's being overstated, if you like, in many ways. So we're not as reliant on that. My concerns are indirect, as you're alluding to. Does this become a broader trade dispute that involves other countries and other products? So does it snowball, if you like? That's where my concerns grow there. And to that point, does it spill over into our prospects for other meats, and namely beef, since you brought it up? Long term, when you have a population that's expected to grow in population and income, the entire U.S. meat livestock industry wants to be positioned to be able to sell into that market, and anything that makes that harder going forward is going to be a harm. So that's a really long way of me saying I think the impacts of this, if those announcements stay and if those tariffs become a reality, are more indirect on what it does in terms of things escalating from here and less a direct impact.
Lastly, rather difficult week for the markets last week. Any chance of a more stable environment this week?
Potentially. What I didn't note earlier, but I'm guessing most of our listeners noticed, was the trade discussions are much broader than just U.S. meat products. So, S&P 500, the stock market in general, had a rough week. I'm highlighting that because an underpinning of strength for probably at least 18 months in the beef market has been domestic consumer demand. And in the event we're shaking domestic confidence, that tends to spill over into reduced demand. I'm not forecasting that this week. That's not my point. But to answer your question, what I'm looking for is here early this week is, does the stock market in general kind of come to terms with, are we not going to have a trade war, is what you're hoping you see develop there? And if that happens and then things calm down, then I would anticipate some stabilization, if you like. The shocks in many ways this past week had to do with outside things like potential trade disruption. So if those discussions calm down or even just pause for a little bit, I think we might see some calmer waters this week.
That would be very welcome indeed. Glynn, thanks for your insight as always. We'll catch up with you again soon.
Thanks for having me on.
He is livestock economist Glynn Tonsor, K-State Research and Extension, checking in with this week's cattle market analysis and comment here on Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Agriculture Today is back now here on the K-State Radio Network. Well, here we are in the latter stages of March, but our guest says that for you cattle producers, it is not too early to be thinking toward fly control in your herds in the late spring and summer. And what you can do about those problems now, we'll cover it with A.J. Tarpoff, beef veterinarian, K-State Research and Extension. Yes, we have a ways to go until weather that would promote this activity really comes along, AJ, but you do want producers to be thinking in these terms right now.
Absolutely. We really need to start building a game plan for external parasite control for the summer months. We've had this long, lingering winter, but spring is upon us, and we will start getting into these vector seasons relatively quickly.
So let's take up the types of flies that impede cattle performance, which is what it's all about.
It really is. So horn flies, we'll start off with those. One of the most important external parasites that we deal with causes over $1 billion worth of damage to the livestock industry every year.
Billion with a B.
Billion with a B. Wow. So this is a huge hinder on performances and stressors on our cattle during the summer months. Now, horn flies, they're an interesting species. Horn flies live their entire lives on the backs of cattle. They don't fly from one animal to another. They spend their time on the backs of animals. What's more important is they take blood meals. And we can have hundreds, if not 1,000 flies all on one animal. We can get anemic levels, but really it's a kind of a subclinical hinder of performance. Now, what level of infection rate corresponds with an economic threshold? That's kind of what the question is, and how many flies is too many? And what they've concluded is 200 to 300 flies on the back of these animals. So if you go out in the morning and you check some of your cows, and you're seeing a bunch of flies on the top of the withers, and those flies migrate about halfway down the animal, that's roughly 200 to 300 flies per animal. At that point is the economic threshold, and that's when we really like to start treating these animals. So that's kind of horn flies. Mm-hmm. And the populations, guess what? They start to rise at about May is where we start getting them to really get high, but it could be a little bit earlier. Okay, we can see some populations of horn flies in April as well. Mm-hmm. So keep that in mind that, yes, they are an issue. Next one is stable flies. This has inherently been more of a confinement and a barnyard issue. But we are seeing rising populations of stable flies out in our pasture settings. Mm-hmm. What's different about stable flies is they have an extremely painful bite. Have you ever seen cattle standing out in a pond on kind of a cooler day, and you wonder why during the summer months? Well, the reason that they're standing in the pond is because the stable flies bite them on their legs. Mm-hmm. And believe it or not, the economic threshold for stable flies is only 5 flies per leg. Mm. But what's different about stable flies is they don't spend their entire lives on livestock. So they will go and take a blood meal, and they'll go rest somewhere else, and then they'll come up to the next one, which also is important that stable flies can transmit anaplasmosis and other bloodborne pathogens. That's what makes them a little bit different. Now, what have we done management-wise that has increased the levels of our stable flies in our pastures, where historically we didn't have an issue?
And that tied to concentrated feeding areas.
Concentrated feeding areas, but really our winter feeding areas. Right. How do we feed livestock during the winter? We give them hay. You know, a lot of operations will deliver some type of hay source. If we have leftover residue from leftover hay, that is the prime breeding ground that our stable flies actually thrive in. So does it make a difference on how we feed during the winter? Yes, it does. If we rolled out bales of feed and spread our feeding areas around our pasture, not as big a deal. If we are using bale rings, however, bale rings do leave over quite a bit of residue at the end of the season. Since we have all that residue, we have the thriving breeding ground for all these stable flies. For every bale ring that we feed out of, we can get 1 million more stable flies in that area the subsequent year. So what do? We have plenty of time right now. Here we are in the middle of March. If we can disturb that ground, if we can work it up, we can compost that residue, we can burn that residue. Something to disrupt the ground, disrupt that residue, where we can destroy some of those larvae before they hatch out.
So get on that as soon as you possibly can is the point there. As far as stable fly control, there's the face fly, and it's a fairly serious disease vector potentially as well.
Disease vector, disease transmitter. Okay, right. What's different about face flies? Face flies are what we see that they're on the nose, they're on the nostrils. They're actually feeding on the nasal secretions and any secretions coming out of the eye. They're very irritating to the animals, but also we can't forget about pink eye. And yes, face flies can transmit Moraxella bovis, the most common pathogen that causes some of our pink eye issues. They can transmit that bacteria from one animal to another. Now, face flies, again, difficult to control because they don't spend their entire life on the animal. The same goes with deer flies and horse flies. Okay, very painful bites. We can see a lot of big lesions and lumps if we're dealing with those. But they can travel several miles from feeding on one animal to another. And those, especially horse flies and deer flies, they can transmit anaplasmosis as well.
So we talked about preemptive steps against stable flies in terms of a cleanup around those hay feeding areas. Can something similar be done against horn flies or face flies, horse flies, the other fly types?
The issue is we can do some things on our own operation, cleaning up vegetation, things of that nature. But at the end of the day, they can travel in from a long distance away. So in all practical cases, not so much, which is unfortunate. But we do have some products and some things that we can use year in and year out, a multimodal approach on any given season. So we do have insecticides. We have things that we might feed through the animal that can attack some of these parasites. And we also have different insecticide classes, and they would be pyrethroids, organophosphates, and avermectins, or macrocytic lactones. None of these products are perfect by themselves.
So outline their strengths and weaknesses here, if you will.
Absolutely. So I'll kind of start off with some of our feed-through products. There's a lot of, if you've ever seen fly mineral, things like that we put out during the summer months, more often than not, though, we have an IGR, an insect growth regulator. Several of these external parasites, like horn flies, actually lay their eggs in fresh manure patties. What actually happens is we feed this IGR. It doesn't interact with the body at all. It gets passed through the manure, and here in this fresh fecal patty, horn flies try to lay their eggs, but they can't fully develop into an adult. We can decrease the overall population within our closed area. However, some of those flies can travel at a distance from other operations. So yes, by itself, does it control all of our parasite issues? No, they don't. But they can drastically reduce the reinfection rates further into the season whenever we use some type of feed-through product, because we're eliminating any of these parasites to develop into an adult. But keep in mind, by itself, we can still get flies coming in.
So you're aiming for an integrated control approach here with the use of additional control measures, right?
Absolutely. And it's up to you to work with your veterinarian and have that discussion through a valid veterinary client-patient relationship on what works best for you. Some of these other insecticide classes, again, reminder, we have pyrethroids, organophosphates, and avermectins. One major thing that we use, which is an excellent tool to have at our disposal, are insecticide-impregnated ear tags. They're very valuable tools as long as we use them correctly and we have a realistic expectations for how long they're supposed to last. Regardless of the ear tags, the majority of them last between 12 and 15 weeks. The issue comes in on when are we putting these ear tags in. In a perfect world, we wait until we hit that threshold of 200 to 300 flies per animal before we put the tags in. So that we're really looking at a couple weeks into May and before we usually see some of these levels. Mm-hmm. But when do we usually put ear tags in?
When we turn cattle out.
When we turn cattle out.
Maybe a couple of weeks earlier, perhaps.
Which may be April, the beginning, right. We're losing another month. Okay, well, 12 to 15 weeks later, guess what? We see another big spike in some of these external parasite issues coming into early fall. These ear tags will no longer work. We've already taken them out to the max of their longevity that they were designed to do, that we may not have full season long with an ear tag. That's important to note, and it's important to understand when we use these. The longer we wait to put them in, the more we'll have protection against on the back end late in the season where we really start seeing some issues. Mm-hmm. The other thing to think about is resistance. Okay, fly tags, because they are on the animal the entire season, we need to make sure we remove them at the end of the year. Fly resistance to some of our pyrethroid and organophosphate and avermectin, and we do see resistance, especially with some of our horn fly. We can have 32 generations of horn flies through one grazing season. So if they are exposed to the same product or the same chemical class for a long period of time or for multiple seasons, we can start running into some true resistance issues. Because of that, especially with our ear tags, is we want to make sure that we're only using a pyrethroid type product once out of every 3 years. In organophosphate, no more than 2 out of 3 years. And also we do have products on the market that are actually an avermectin class, which is a macrocytic lactone that is finally, we have one of those classes in an ear tag for a long-acting product. So all three of these, we can rotate these. Just because something worked great last year does not necessarily mean that you use the same product again and again. We need to make sure that we're planning accordingly so these products work to their maximum benefit for years to come.
So it's about strategizing when it comes to fly control and thinking ahead right now to the potential for those flies emerging and being prepared to respond to them. AJ, we appreciate the comments on all of this. We'll have you back soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beef veterinarian AJ Tarpoff, K-State Research and Extension. And you're tuned to Agriculture Today with more after this break.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. Registration for Discovery Days, one of the biggest programs for Kansas 4-H, is currently underway, and classes are already starting to fill up. Discovery Days is open to all youth, not just 4-H members, between the ages of 13 and 18. This year's theme is Tell Your Story, and Kansas 4-H Events Coordinator Sarah Keatley is here to talk about what Discovery Days offers teens and the benefits of attending. Sarah, Discovery Days coming up in late May and early June. Let's run through some of the things that they need to know because there's a lot of details that need to be covered. First of all, they can go to the website and find a lot of information, but in the meantime, let's talk about some of the things that go on at Discovery Days.
Absolutely, Jeff. So Discovery Days this year is May 29th to June 1st here at Kansas State University. It's a mini college experience. So the youth get to stay in the residence halls, and then they take classes on campus during the day. And so with that, they have a chance to meet new people, learn new things, visit the different departments and colleges on campus, and then participate in some fun activities in the evening.
You said they get to take classes. That doesn't always sound like something that kids want to do in the summertime.
Absolutely, you're right.
I'm assuming these are kind of fun classes?
They are fun classes. So we advertise this to all of the colleges and the departments here at K-State. We have classes such as rock climbing that are going to be taught over at the rec. We have swing dancing classes, classes about floral design, classes about food safety. We have a class called 500 College Experiences One Day, and so that's going to be a 3-hour class. There's a class on joining the Air Force and what that experience is like if you're a student here at K-State. The options are just really endless this year.
And they can go online and they can look over all these class options?
Yeah, so on our website at kansas4h.org, again, that's kansas4h.org. You can go on our website, and under events and activities and under conferences is Discovery Days. So if you click on Discovery Days, it'll take you to all of the information you will need to know about what is going to be offered this year, and including that is the class catalog. That includes all of the classes that are going to be taught and what times those classes will be taught at.
So if someone has a specific interest like horticulture, they can kind of gear their visit towards that?
They can. You can customize your schedule based upon class availability. So registration for Discovery Days opened on March 1st, and it will close on April 15th. And so some of our classes have filled up already, but we have a tremendous amount of classes that are still open. Classes about advanced floral design, things that you can do in the horticulture department. Over in Throgmorton Hall, we have classes on crops and weeds, so kind of taking it down a different path in case flowers are not your thing.
You mentioned the registration, and there is a fee associated with that, but it covers a lot.
It does. So the fee to come to this is $235. That covers your room and board for the 4 days, 3 nights, a T-shirt, your insurance, and any general supplies that are needed. Now, if you take a class that requires additional supplies, there is a cost associated with that, and that is listed in that class catalog that we talked about, and it'll also be added on to your registration fee as you register for those classes.
So they'll be able to tell exactly how much they're going to be spending to come to this.
Absolutely. Something this year that we're pretty excited about is for our Discovery Days Night Live this year, we will be having a hypnotist come into campus and be doing a hypnotist show. So if that's something that interests you, we're going to invite all of the delegates to come to that event on Wednesday evening.
In terms of numbers, what are we looking at for Discovery Days? I'm assuming that this is of interest to a lot of people.
It is. So this is one of our biggest events that we put on here for the Kansas 4-H program. Typically, we have anywhere from 400 to 600 youth and adults come. Right now, we're on track to have over 500 youth and adults come to Discovery Days this year. So we're excited to see those numbers increasing. We're excited to offer new classes and different opportunities for our youth to attend while they're here on campus.
And if you've come in past years, it sounds like there are always new and different things.
Yeah, so your schedule will never be the same. And that's one of the great things about Discovery Days is you meet so many different people because of the different classes that you're taking and the different experiences that you're having while you're on campus.
I was looking at the schedule, and there's some downtime, but for the most part, it's kind of a sun-up to sundown event.
It is. So we keep you busy, we keep you going, we keep you moving the entire time that you're here on campus. We want you to get the most of your experiences while you're here in Manhattan, Kansas, and we want you to experience Kansas State University at your maximum.
I think some of us kind of assume that because Kansas State University is so well known that everyone knows Kansas State University, but they might know the name, but they certainly probably do not know the campus.
They don't know the campus. And so this is a great opportunity for those kids who are thinking about attending Kansas State to come and get a hands-on, real-life tour and experience over 4 days here at the university. Delegates are staying in the residence halls, and then they also travel over to the Union for all of our group activities. So on that walk that they get over to the Union, they get to see all of the different buildings, they get to see the quad, and the different things that the university has to offer. And
they don't have to do it in January.
Exactly.
I'm assuming then that there are, as chaperones, I'm assuming that some of those are parents who are bringing 4-H members and others from western Kansas all across the state.
Yeah, so each local extension unit provides chaperones for their delegates that attend. And so for every 15 youth, we need to have at least one chaperone. And so those are extension staff, volunteers, parents. As long as they've gone through the volunteer registration process, they are good to go as a chaperone for Discovery Days this year, and we always need more chaperones. So if you're interested in listening and want to be a chaperone, we encourage you to visit with your local extension agent.
This is something where I imagine that there's a lot of bonding just between the people who come because they've got a lot of shared interests. They're all between that 13 and 18 age group. So there's a chance to connect with friends that you maybe see at other events.
There is. So at a lot of our state events, this may be the only time that youth get to see each other that have met at other state events. And so this is a chance to make those new connections and to rekindle those other connections that folks may have made throughout the year.
And again, if somebody needs more information, how can they find that? And really, you'd like them to register as soon as possible?
Yeah, so registration, we encourage everyone to register as soon as possible. As I said, those classes are filling up. Several are already full. If they are not on the registration when you go through the process, then that means the class has been full and the system has removed it from the list. But to register for Discovery Days, you can go to kansas4h.org. Again, that's kansas4h.org. You can also call us at the State 4-H office at 785-532-5800, and any of our staff can answer your questions that you might have about Discovery Days.
And if you run into one of those classes that is full, that's another college learning experience because you'll experience that too.
You will, definitely, when you go to enroll in your college courses.
That's Kansas 4-H Events Coordinator Sarah Keatley discussing the upcoming Discovery Days, set for May 29th through June 1st on the Kansas State University campus in Manhattan. Again, for more information, go to kansas4h.org or contact your local extension office. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Thanks for joining us. This is Agriculture Today.